What if I told you that the progress we've made in reducing violence and harm and trauma over the past 100 years is the same thing that makes us feel like we're actually moving backwards? Well, I'm going to show you a new psychological phenomenon that proves just that. Now, before we look into that, we first have to look at another psychological phenomenon that shows us how we got here. Nick Haslam introduced an idea in 2016 called concept creep.
What a creep.
Concept creep suggests that certain, usually negative concepts expand in their meaning over time. And this expansion happens in two distinct ways: horizontally and vertically. Horizontal expansion means to take the same concept and apply it in a new way or in a new context. Take, for instance, the concept of bullying. Now, people have been bullying each other before people were, people, like when we were Neanderthals, essentially. But the actual concept of bullying was really introduced in 1970s in Scandinavia. So originally, bullying was defined as an active form of aggression towards a child that was intentional, repetitive, and developed through a power imbalance. The first example of horizontal expansion happened when bullying moved into the online digital space, i.e. cyberbullying. And another form of horizontal expansion was when bullying moved into the workplace for adults. Workplace bullying is actually kind of a new thing as a byproduct of the horizontal concept creep. Now, vertical expansions are where things get a little bit more interesting. Vertical expansion happens downward and means that a concept will expand to include less severe instances and will be open to looser criteria. You remember when I said the first definition of bullying included an active form of aggression that was repetitive and intentional? Now, for something to be considered bullying, it doesn't have to be active or repetitive or even intentional. I'm not going to analyze the entire idea of concept creep, but in the instance of bullying, at least it makes sense. A lot of you who are watching this, like me, were probably bullied in some way at school and perhaps in the workplace too. And being able to put a label on your negative experience is crucial to make sense of it. There's also the other side of this, where the concept of bullying has expanded so much that being cheeky and teasing someone a little bit and building some banter as a way to bond might be perceived as bullying. And that can set up a huge cascade of issues. Now that we understand what concept creep is, we can dig deeper and really look at this paradox of progress. A few years after the concept of concept creep was introduced to the world, David Lavari and his colleagues at Harvard found a new psychological phenomenon called prevalence-induced concept change, a phenomenon as fascinating as the name is dull. Now, on the heels of concept creep, David Lavari set up an experiment to test how this actually happens. Let me tell you now, when I first read this paper, I was lost for words. So the researchers gathered hundreds of participants and sat them in front of a computer screen. Each participant saw a dot on the screen that was on the spectrum of very blue to very purple and all the mixtures in between. The researchers told the participants that they have to decide if the dot is blue or not blue. If they think the dot's blue, press this button. If they think it's not blue, press that button. And that's it. Now they had to do this 800 times. So in the first 200 trials, there were an equal amount of blue and purple dots. But over the last 600 trials, the researchers slowly reduced the number of blue dots that were shown. So by the end, there were hardly any left. So the researchers found that what participants considered blue at the beginning of the trials changed at the end of the trials. Specifically, at the beginning of the trials, what participants considered to be not blue dots were by the end of the trial considered to be blue. Basically, as the blue dots decrease over the period of the trials, participants didn't adjust to the decrease in the blue dots. Instead, they expanded their criteria for what they considered to be blue. And a dot that they didn't consider as blue at the beginning of the trial, they chose that as blue without realizing it at the end of the trial. Like you, I was skeptical too. I thought, isn't this just a byproduct of the sheer boredom and the strain on the eyes to try to figure out, if this is blue or if this is purple and all the shades in between? Like, you would think that's the case. And luckily the researchers thought of that as well. So what they did next was replicated this experiment with different, bigger and more troubling concepts. So the research used the blue dot effect on ethical judgment. So same experiment, just replaced the dots with a spectrum of unethical and very ethical job descriptions and all the vagueness in between. And again, the research showed participants an equal amount of ethical and unethical job descriptions, and over the course of the trials they reduced the number of unethical job descriptions. And they found the same effect. What participants decided was ethical at the beginning of the trial, by the end of the trial deemed as unethical, only because there were fewer instances of unethical job descriptions. And they repeated this with non-threatening and threatening faces, and they found the same effect. When people saw fewer threatening faces, they changed the criteria and chose a face that they didn't consider as threatening at the beginning of the trials as threatening at the end of the trials. Now, I don't know about you, but I found this absolutely mind-blowing, and it gets better. So the researchers wanted to test and make sure this effect was robust. So they did the experiments with a few other modifications. First, the researchers told the participants that they would reduce the number of blue dots or threatening faces or unethical job descriptions over the course of the trials. So all the participants knew what was going to happen.
You've been warned, alright? Let's move forward amicably.
And still, they found the same effect. Next, the researchers told the participants about the reduction, but this time they didn't do it gradually, linearly over time. They did it straight away, and still they found the same effect. And finally, the researchers told the participants about the reduction. They did it abruptly and gave participants money to make sure they guessed correctly or chose correctly, and still they found the same effect.
Oh my god.
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 No matter what the researchers tried, they still found the same effect. The fact that concepts grow larger as their instances grow smaller is just head-turning. Now, all of these experiments have an overarching theme and some pretty sobering consequences. As we see fewer instances of something bad, we don't recognize intrinsically that things are getting better. And a lot of people and organizations are working really, really hard at making the world a safer and better place. Now, these organizations and people probably aren't seeing the fruits of their efforts. In fact, they probably think that their efforts are in vain. So what happens next? You double down on your efforts, but on this expanded criteria. And it turns into the self-perpetuating cycle of continuously trying to improve the world that you think isn't getting better when it is. Instead of adjusting our expectation of pain and suffering as the world improves, we fit this new reality into our default expectation of pain and suffering. Let me give you an example. When I first got a proper massage by a therapist, they really dug into my super tight calves. Initially, the pain was like a solid 8, 9, and going up to a 10. And then after like 30 seconds, as I was getting really into it, I was like, yeah, I can do this. It just started wearing off. So I told my therapist, I'm like, hey, keep that original pressure on that you did before. You know what he said? I haven't changed anything. He had been applying the same amount of pressure consistently throughout the time that I felt less pain in my calves. So the only thing that changed was my perception of pain, and it reduced over time without any actual change in what the therapist was doing. And we can expand this on a larger scale. We're looking at global violence and trauma. The trauma from violence was a byproduct of serious physical or sexual assault, being in war, being in a car crash, a lot of extreme stuff like that. Now some people feel that they've experienced trauma and violence simply by reading something unpleasant online. Look, I'm not here to invalidate anyone's experience and emotions. Only you experience what you experience, and only you feel what you feel. Now, there's something really troubling about this, but also something reassuring too. If we're able to reduce our threshold of pain and suffering as we make the world a safer place, we can also increase our threshold of pain and suffering as and if the world becomes a bit more dangerous, or if our lives become a bit more dangerous. But the real problem is that as we make the world safer, we think it's getting worse. Now, I've been thinking about this for a little while now, and I'm trying to figure out, how is this happening? Is it the case that we now have the language and biomarkers to articulate and validate the experiences that we've always had? Or is it the case that our words are becoming our world insofar as the languages that we hear and the language we use is actually constructing and creating our perception of reality? And it's probably a mix of both. But where do we go from here? Look, I have no idea. But one silver lining I can take from this, we can reduce our threshold to pain. We can also increase it. And it doesn't mean that we have to invalidate our experiences. We can say, hey, this life experience that I've had was really shit and it made me feel really bad. But you can also grow from it. If you can go one way, why not the other? That's it. I'm Harris, and I'll see you again next time. Peace.